If you love great stories, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to my channel to make sure you don't miss any new videos. Like and share this video with your friends if you enjoyed it, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. "What's up?" Luke asked, looking at Wednesday. "Do you remember what you told me about the thoughts you read from the Gorgon, Atlas, before he died?" Wednesday asked, staring at him intently with her dark eyes. "Yes, that they wanted to steal Crackstone's demonic book. That's why they mounted such a large-scale attack and wanted to continue with the ritual," Luke replied, nodding and also staring back at Wednesday. To an average person, her unwavering gaze might feel uncomfortable, but Luke liked it. "Exactly, the demonic book," Wednesday said, her eyes narrowing slightly. Luke could tell where the conversation was heading. "Do you?" Luke said, leaving his question unfinished, letting it hang in the silence of the underground room. "What do you know about demons?" Wednesday asked, without responding to Luke's insinuation. "Let's see," Luke said as he lay his head in Wednesday's lap. He was tired after dodging so many arrows and sustaining several cuts. Wednesday didn't mind that he rested his head on her lap, and she continued to watch him, her expression unchanged. "They're malevolent beings that only want to cause destruction in our world. They exist in another plane or dimension, which outcasts call the underworld. Through pacts with humans, whether outcasts or normies, they can obtain souls. That's one way. In exchange, they increase the contractor's strength, grant new powers, or extend their life. But the contract has no time limit, and it's not fair. The person who made the pact must kill people to provide souls to the demon," Luke explained, summarizing what Edgar had told him the first time he learned about demons. "What else?" Wednesday asked, gently stroking Luke's forehead with her hand. She didn't seem surprised by this information. After killing Atlas, Sabrina, and Sebastian, Luke had gained more knowledge about these beings. Edgar had told him more in-depth information about demons, providing details and being less vague. It was a long conversation, but Luke learned a lot about these beings, and the situation didn't look very promising for humans, both normies and outcasts. Not all demons can make pacts. There are 3 groups of demons: lesser demons, intermediate demons, and greater demons. Only the intermediate and greater ones have the intelligence to make deals with humans, Luke began, telling Wednesday everything he knew about demons. Lesser demons are primal beings that wander between the plane known as the underworld and the earthly realm, where normies and outcasts live. These demons have a single purpose: to devour souls to satiate their boundless hunger. They are mindless creatures that exist only to seek out souls to consume. If they devour enough souls, lesser demons can evolve into intermediate demons. Intermediate demons are more powerful and possess intelligence equivalent to that of humans, making them far more dangerous. With this level of reasoning, they can manipulate and seduce humans through pacts, forcing their victims to obtain souls for them. However, their insatiable hunger for souls remains their primary drive, and if they do not feed regularly, they devolve back into lesser demons, losing both their power and intelligence. Knowing that outcasts might reject their pacts if they are mentally strong, and that this could expose them, demons prefer to avoid such individuals. Instead, they seek mentally weak victims, like outcasts or normies with trauma who are easy to manipulate. Although this provides them with fewer souls compared to what they need to evolve or maintain their power, it forces them to hunt in the earthly realm to avoid devolving. If they're lucky, they might find a powerful yet unstable contractor whom they can control to obtain more valuable souls. Lastly, there are the greater demons. Only 6 of these beings are known to exist in America. This knowledge comes from the 6 demonic books. One of these 6 books is the one Crackstone used, the Book of SAGA, supposedly resting in his coffin beside him, which Atlas sought to take to Elliot. Unlike the lesser and intermediate demons, these 6 greater demons haven't been seen in the human world for hundreds of years. They don't need to expose themselves to the human world to obtain souls. They use the books to gather souls from afar. Since these beings aren't seen in the human world, no one knows if they can devolve. To Edgar, they likely no longer have that disadvantage. nor is it known if they can continue evolving. The goal of the Demon Extermination Department is to eliminate lesser and intermediate demons before they evolve, turning into an even greater threat. They don't want there to be a seventh book. It's also unknown exactly how many souls an intermediate demon needs to evolve, but it's better not to find out. The main advantage all demons have is that they can travel between the underworld and the human world. This puts outcasts in a bind, as they cannot travel to the underworld to eradicate them. Fortunately for outcasts, demons are not very numerous. In fact, they are even less common than outcasts themselves, who are already a minority compared to normies. This difference in numbers keeps the threat from being truly devastating for now. But outcasts live with the constant worry of knowing that 6 greater demons watch the human plane from the shadows, coveting the souls of its inhabitants and waiting for the right moment to act. "You know more than I thought," Wednesday said, with a hint of surprise in her tone. She hadn't expected Luke to know so much in such detail. "The Poes face a family that makes deals with these beings. It's natural that I have my sources," Luke said with a slight smile. "I'm more surprised that you're not surprised by all this information. It seems like you already knew," Luke added. "It's natural that I know all this. My father works in the Demon Extermination Department. I learned all this by sneaking into his study," Wednesday said, recalling the nights she had snuck into her father's office in the mansion. "Gomez belongs to the Demon Extermination Department?" Luke thought, surprised. It wasn't too crazy to think Gomez might work in that department, but it was strange to imagine him doing that kind of work. 3. "Does he hold a high position?" Luke asked, curious. "I don't know. I only infiltrated and looked through his personal study here. His security leaves much to be desired," Wednesday replied. "Why are demons such a taboo topic among outcasts?" Luke asked. Edgar always took his time to tell Luke the full story about demons, and Luke knew he still hadn't shared everything he knew. On the other hand, most outcasts have little awareness of demons. Those who are aware of these beings are the 66 families that belong to the council. There are outcasts like Gia and others Luke has met who have no idea about Crackstone's true nature or the existence of demons. He didn't understand why there was so much secrecy around the topic. It would be much better if people were more aware of these beings. "I don't know. Maybe it's to prevent idiots from seeking out these beings to increase their powers for selfish reasons," Wednesday said. "It could lead to more people wanting to make demonic deals or create cults to worship these beings, especially the greater demons." "I suppose," Luke replied. "So, what exactly do you want to do with Crackstone's demonic book?" he asked, returning to the original topic of their conversation. "Recover it, of course. What else?" Wednesday said, her expression unchanging at the statement. "This girl," Luke thought, already knowing she would say that. "It's a book of a greater demon. It's very dangerous. Why do you want it?" Luke asked. Just being one of the 6 main demonic books would be enough to mobilize the entire Demon Extermination Department. "To study it, we need to learn more about these greater demons. They're hiding in their lairs. There must be a way to draw them out and hunt them," Wednesday said, her eyes narrowing. "Besides, we can learn more about demonic powers. It's essential to face the Spellmans. It's possible they also possess one of the 6 main demonic books," she added, and Luke couldn't deny that she had a point. "You're right, but it'll be dangerous. We need to revive Crackstone, and for that, we have to do what Marilyn, Atlas, and the others attempted," Luke said with a thoughtful look. "The most dangerous part would be fighting Crackstone. They'd have to kill him and steal the book, as there's no other way to get into the coffin, which is sealed with a blood lock. They can't take the book without reviving the demonic normie." In the past, Luke would have been confident about facing Crackstone, as Edgar had said he could defeat him with his 3 auras, and having Wednesday as a partner would make the fight easier. However, things changed when he and Edgar learned that Crackstone possessed one of the 6 main demonic books. His strength could be far greater than they'd initially thought. Edgar had told Luke he'd need to be at the peak of level 4 of the yellow aura to take on Crackstone. That is, around 10 tons of telekinetic power. While he wasn't at that level before, he could have managed with his other 2 auras. But now, the situation was different, as Crackstone's power could be much greater if he had made a pact with a greater demon. Will you help me or not? I'm not letting the book stay there, leaving the only way to retrieve it by using the blood of a family member, Wednesday said in response to Luke's silence. The Spellmans knew the book was there, so they wouldn't sit idly by. Most likely, they would try to steal it again in the future, needing the blood of an Addams to do so. They could target her younger brother or more distant members of the Addams family, or even herself again. My strength has grown a lot since then. Together with Wednesday, we should be able to defeat him even if he's stronger, thought Luke, quickly reaching a conclusion. Fine, I'll help you. Let's kill that bastard once and for all and get that demonic book back, said Luke, noticing a faint smile form on Wednesday's face, though it disappeared almost immediately. For that, we'll need mutilated body parts for the ritual that opens the blood coffin, Wednesday replied, unfazed. Great, so now we're turning into serial killers like Marilyn, Luke replied with a mocking grin. We won't stoop that low. We'll get the mutilated parts from criminals. New York has a high crime rate. Killing a few scumbags will be doing the normies a favor, said Wednesday, without a hint of doubt in her voice. The outcasts had a motto they took very seriously: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If someone attacks them lethally, they have the right to take an arm, a leg, or even tear out their heart. I like that better. We'll be like Watchmen, though it'll be way too easy, said Luke, smile as he imagined prowling through New York's dark streets, facing criminals. Luke and Wednesday could kill a normie without anyone noticing, given all the abilities they had. Unlike the Hyde, they weren't out-of-control beasts, and their skills were ideal for killing without being detected. Let's make it more exciting. Let's not use our auras. That way the thrill of killing will be real, suggested Wednesday. Luke raised an eyebrow. Sounds good, but isn't it a bit risky? He asked, though his enthusiasm grew at Wednesday's suggestion. It is, Wednesday replied without hesitation. But real danger is what makes the hunt thrilling, she added, feeling her excitement build at the thought of hunting down a filthy criminal with her bare hands, without using their auras, making the challenge even greater. Let's do it, Luke said excitedly. The idea of taking justice into his own hands had always crossed his mind, probably from reading too many comics. We could even use different names, nicknames, and costumes if possible, Luke rambled, getting lost in his own fantasy. Wednesday looked at him with a raised eyebrow, no longer following his train of thought. A moment ago, they were on the same page about killing criminals in cold blood, but now they weren't. I don't know what you're talking about, and I'm not wearing a ridiculous costume while killing a criminal. We need to get that demonic book before we leave for Ohio. We have to hurry, Wednesday said. Right, Luke said, snapping back to reality. Do you have the Book of Shadows? We'll need it. My mother keeps it. Her study is a bit harder to access, but nothing I can't handle. We'll steal it when my parents go on their date night at the cemetery, Wednesday said, and Luke nodded. Every Tuesday, Gomez and Morticia had a date night at the Addams Cemetery that lasted all night. With everything discussed, they both stood up and started heading towards the exit of the underground chamber. They climbed a dimly lit staircase until they reached a metal door. I'll be able to practice my blue aura with those criminals, Luke thought, while Wednesday reached out and grasped the doorknob with her hand. Gomez had told Luke that he was wasting his blue aura in combat and that he could get more out of it. However, training the blue aura isn't easy. He needs a guinea pig or someone willing to let him manipulate their mind, and nobody wants that. For example, the best way to improve his mind-reading ability is, naturally, by reading minds. I could set up a fortune-teller booth in New York, thought Luke, a new idea sparking in his mind. That way, he could practice mind-reading with the customers who came by, trying to navigate through their memories while making eye contact and surprising them. He could earn a bit of money while honing his mind-reading skill. As he was thinking about this, Wednesday opened the door. and a sharp gust of wind rushed in from the threshold. A mechanism clicked into action with a dull noise, and a giant axe shot out from the opposite wall, cutting through the air at terrifying speed. With superhuman agility, Wednesday threw herself to the side at the last second. The axe whizzed past her, embedding itself with a crash into the wall just above the door. "That damned kid doesn't give up, huh?" thought Luke, glancing up at the axe lodged deep into the wall just inches away. If he had been the first to step through, he would have had to dodge that deadly strike. It was obvious to Luke who was behind this latest assassination attempt: Pugsley. Ever since they had arrived at the Adams mansion, the malicious-eyed boy with his deadpan expression had tried to finish him off more times than he could count. In fact, he'd had more assassination attempts than days spent in this mansion. The worst part was that the boy was very skilled at setting traps, and since they were traps and not direct attacks, Luke's observation hacky didn't work on them. That's why he was putting extra emphasis on improving his superhuman reflexes. He needed to be able to react, either stopping a trap mid-flight with his telekinesis or dodging it if it wasn't too fast. "Your adorable brother's handiwork. I told you should set some limits. You deserve the crossfire," said Luke as he approached Wednesday, who was crouched down, looking at something in her hand. Luke had complained to Wednesday about Pugsley, but she dismissed it, saying it was just a normal game, one she and Pugsley had played since they were kids, and they were both still alive. Complaining to Gomez and Morticia had also been useless, as they too saw it as a harmless game. Wednesday remained silent, studying her pale palm. In it was a tiny, broken raven pendant. When she had stepped aside, the blade of the axe had managed to graze her necklace, snapping it. "The necklace I gave her," thought Luke as he moved closer to Wednesday, noticing the halved raven in her hand. Wednesday's cold eyes stopped examining the broken necklace and turned toward the dark hallway from where the axe had appeared. "Pugsley," she murmured, her icy voice echoing in the air. Suddenly, a dull thud, like someone tripping, echoed from the hallway, followed by a creak that broke the silence. It sounded like the little brat had stumbled out of fear. Then they began to hear hurried footsteps retreating, fleeing as far as possible. In an instant, Wednesday vanished into her own shadow. "Why do I feel sorry for him?" murmured Luke, shaking his head. Luke stood still, watching the dark hallway. After a minute of silence, a scream was heard. The rat had been caught. "I hope after this he stops bothering me, if he survives," thought Luke, beginning to walk towards his room. He couldn't understand how Pugsley had bullies and needed Wednesday to defend him. Maybe at school, he was shyer and not as bold as he was at home, where he had no fear of setting traps to kill their guests. 5 days later, Tuesday arrived, the day when Gomez and Morticia had their weekly late-night date at the cemetery. Luke was in his room, with numerous candles lit to provide decent lighting. On the old wooden desk sat his MacBook, and he was typing nonstop. He had already decided what his next book would be, the third in his career as an author. With the first two, he had made a lot of money. With the movie adaptation of Carrie and the success of Salem's Lot, Luke's net worth had surpassed $2 million after taxes. His agent, Josh, had been thrilled when Luke told him he was writing a new book and would probably have it finished by the end of the holidays. Luke was playing it slow, sending Josh sections that weren't quite perfect so that Josh would help refine them, as it would seem odd to finish a book of hundreds of pages so quickly and have it flawless. He had to keep things believable and make his writing abilities seem genuine. It wasn't too difficult. "This is good for now," thought Luke, stopping his writing. He checked the time. It was almost 3 in the morning. The time to sneak into Morticia's study was approaching. He leaned back in his chair and looked up at the ceiling. It had already been 15 days since he arrived at the Adams mansion. To his surprise, he felt very comfortable. His relationship with Wednesday had also improved, contrary to his expectations. Since they were both so solitary, he had thought Wednesday might feel invaded with him living in her house, but that wasn't the case. As for the trip to Ohio, Luke hadn't been able to come up with any idea to go there undetected once they were in Shadyside and Sunnyvale. If Natasha, a shapeshifter, had been found by the Kyria clan, he'd likely be discovered too, despite his efforts to stay hidden. So he had to accept Natasha's idea of creating false identities for the three of them, in which he would change his gender, since he was famous and could be recognized on the street. The issue was that they'd have to stay several days in Sunnyvale and Shadowside, as they needed to thoroughly explore both towns for the clues his parents had hidden. A different appearance would be helpful to move around both towns without constantly hiding. As for his parents, who had left it up to chance whether he and Natasha survived, Luke tried to stop dwelling on it. There was nothing he could do to change the past or the choices they'd made. He couldn't deny feeling disappointed and saddened, but life went on. Not everything had been bad after learning this. Since that night when Wednesday had hugged him so he could sleep, she had started treating him much more warmly, in her own way. Her gestures were subtle, but there was genuine care in how she looked at him, how she made sure he didn't feel alone at certain times. Can vulnerability be attractive to a woman? Thought Luke, reclining in his chair with a lazy gaze, waiting for the time to start the mission. A couple of soft knocks on the door snapped him back to reality. "Come in," Luke said, sitting up in his chair. The door creaked open, and Wednesday walked in at a calm pace. "In 5 minutes, it'll be time. We need to head to the North Tower. At the very top is my mother's study," Wednesday said as she approached Luke's chair and settled onto his lap. Luke shivered slightly, feeling Wednesday on his legs. It wasn't the first time she'd done this, but he still got nervous and had to control himself so it wouldn't show on his face. "Yes, what kind of security does the room have? I don't want to die for snooping around," Luke asked. "Don't worry. It's not my first time sneaking in. It'll be easy. You just need to tell me with your abilities where the traps are since they change places every day, which is the most annoying part. You never know where they'll come from, but now we won't have that problem." Wednesday replied in her usual monotone, her gaze shifting to the screen of Luke's MacBook. "A new book?" she asked, noticing the lines of text forming the typical structure of a novel. "Yes, it's something I thought of after spending these days here at the mansion. A book where a normie starts to lose his mind little by little. Although, instead of a mansion, I thought it'd be more interesting to set it in a hotel. My protagonist takes a job as a caretaker and goes there with his family," Luke replied, keeping a poker face, since it wasn't an entirely new idea. "Interesting. Liminal spaces. Physical and psychological isolation," Wednesday said, resting a hand on her chin. The idea of a descent into madness in an empty hotel, though not truly empty, as supernatural things begin to happen there, seemed very appealing. "Yeah, it's just an idea. Nothing concrete yet," said Luke, downplaying it. He knew Wednesday took writing very seriously and was still working on her first novel. He already had 2 successful novels, but the ideas were essentially stolen. He felt uneasy about it, especially since she put in so much effort and had already faced rejection from a publisher, who received a lovely gift for turning down her work. "Nothing concrete. You've made a lot of progress. Don't sell yourself short," Wednesday said, raising an eyebrow with that inquisitive look that always seemed to be analyzing him. Luke exhaled, trying to keep a calm facade while internally sighing. "Yes, thanks." "Can I read it more thoroughly later?" Wednesday asked, in a neutral tone that hinted at her interest. "Maybe it could help with my own novel," she added bluntly. Luke was a bit surprised by this. Wednesday was extremely critical, even ruthless, with most of what she read. He knew she had enjoyed his previous works, though she never openly praised them. But the absence of criticism was enough to know she held a favorable opinion. "Sure, if it helps you with your novel, read it whenever you want," Luke nodded. "But in return, you have to let me read your novel," he added. "It's not finished. I have to change a lot of parts and details according to several editors. It's too bloody, explicit, and touches on very sensitive themes," Wednesday replied with a hint of displeasure. The constant rejections had left her frustrated, and though she hated to admit it, she had no choice but to consider the feedback. "This one isn't finished either," Luke said, and Wednesday couldn't argue with that logic. Fine, let's go to my room. I have a copy of the first manuscript I sent, the original, without any of the changes the editors suggested. I'm sure you'll appreciate it, said Wednesday, standing up from Luke's lap and walking toward the door. Luke followed her, his curiosity growing with each step. Just how bloody, explicit, and disturbing did Wednesday's novel have to be for the editors to reject it? Luke entered Wednesday's room. The space was similar in size to the other rooms in the mansion, but its tidiness and meticulous order made it stand out. The four-poster bed dominated the center, built with black wood and carved with intricate details. It had a canopy made of black velvet, which was pulled back to reveal coal-black sheets adorned with white skull embroidery. The walls were a dark gray shade, and an iron chandelier hung from the ceiling, lit by candles that bathed the room in warm light. If I had a chandelier that big, I'd have better lighting, Luke said, eyeing it enviously. He had to light dozens of candles to get decent illumination. You complain too much about lighting for a clairvoyant, Wednesday commented, walking over to an antique wooden desk. What can I say? I'm a fan of electricity more than candles, Luke replied, shrugging. Although he liked staying up late, he always preferred to do so with the comfort of modern technology. At first, charging his phone and MacBook had been a challenge in this mansion with no electricity. Eventually, he bought a power station that charges with solar energy. It cost him over $7,000, but it was worth every penny. With that thing you bought, you can power dozens of electric lights. Just plug them in and stop complaining, Wednesday said, opening one of the desk drawers. It would be an aesthetic crime. All this Gothic decor would lose its essence with LED bulbs, Luke replied, crossing his arms. Wednesday flashed a sarcastic smile, not looking up from the drawer. Sure, because your gaming console, massive TV, high-end computer, and that phone you never let go of are totally in sync with the gloomy atmosphere, right? She said with a mocking tone. That's different. They're modern necessities you wouldn't understand, Luke said, chuckling. What you need is to accept that you're addicted to technology. It's only going to burn out your brain, Wednesday replied, pulling a manuscript with many pages from the deep drawer. Stop criticizing me, said Luke. Stop complaining, Wednesday shot back, turning around and handing him the manuscript. Oh, that's a lot of pages for a first novel, Luke commented, flipping through it. 616 pages, Wednesday replied. Luke closed the manuscript and noticed Wednesday's broken raven necklace, the one he had given her, sitting on the desk. Couldn't you fix it? Luke asked. Ever since that day, Pugsley had stopped setting lethal traps to kill him. At their lunches, he seemed paler than usual, and his usual dead fish expression was even more pronounced. No, gluing the two pieces back together would leave it misaligned. It would be imperfect, Wednesday responded with a calm that anyone else might mistake for indifference, but he noticed it. A faint shadow in her eyes, something only someone who knew her well could pick up on. Luke stayed silent for a few seconds, watching as Wednesday's fingers touched the broken necklace. Something didn't quite match her usual indifference. Wait here, said Luke, taking the necklace from her hands. Wednesday raised an eyebrow at him. And what do you plan to do? Fix it with a spell? Luke just gave her a half-smile before turning and leaving the room. With his telekinesis, he opened the door. After a while, he returned. In his hands, he held two necklaces, each with half of the raven. Without saying a word, he approached Wednesday and held out one of the necklaces. One for you and one for me, he said, extending one half of the raven to her. Wednesday looked at him for a moment, her dark eyes resting on the necklace and then on him. Although her expression remained almost unchanged, Luke noticed a different glint in her dark eyes. Not bad, Wednesday remarked as she put on the necklace. Luke also put on the other half. After that, they headed toward the tower where Morticia's study was located. After a few minutes of walking down dark corridors and making several turns, they began to ascend a spiral staircase. Every so often, a lit torch was embedded in the hard stone walls. The staircase ended, and they walked a few more steps until they stood in front of an enormous door. Wednesday pulled 2 small, flat papers from her sleeve. She crouched down in front of the door, where a small gap between the wood and the floor allowed a slight draft to pass through. She slid the papers through the opening, gently pushing them to the other side. Then, she stood back up and looked at Luke. "We'll enter with your shambles. When we do, since we're not going through the door, we'll be detected as intruders, and the traps will activate." "Where are they?" Wednesday asked. "Right on the first tile where you left the papers, spikes will shoot up. After that, arrows will fire from the front and side walls," Luke responded, having already expanded his domain over the room. Small holes were hidden in plain sight on the study walls, from where the arrows would emerge, similar to the mechanism in the underground chamber. Likewise, spikes would shoot up from the floor, aiming to impale them. "The arrows will be easy to block. Their speed isn't much. The only problem is the spikes, since we'll appear right on top of them," Wednesday said, pausing and looking at him calmly. "But with your flight, it'll be simple. I'll leave it all to you." Before Luke could add anything to the plan, he felt Wednesday's cold, pale arms slip around his neck, holding him. Using shambles is easier when both people are close together. "Guess I have to do all the work," Luke said with a half-smile, extending his hand and positioning his fingers. In a blink, they disappeared and reappeared on the other side. The papers were gone. They had swapped positions with them. Despite the physical barrier of the door and walls, Luke was able to bypass them by expanding his domain, using his clairvoyant sense, which gave him precise control over the space. This, combined with his telekinesis, allowed him to swap places instantly with the papers on the other side, effortlessly moving through physical barriers. The instant Luke's feet touched the room's tile, he flew up, moving away from the ground. Just seconds later, 3 gleaming metal spikes shot up from the floor at high speed. The spikes were nearly a meter tall, but Luke had already lifted off, avoiding them. That wasn't all, though. Dozens of arrows launched at incredible speed from the walls. With his recently enhanced and well-trained reflexes, Luke reacted in time. Using his telekinesis, he stopped all the arrows, which hovered around him and Wednesday, who maintained her stoic expression. With a simple nod, Luke let the arrows drop to the floor and then landed softly beside Wednesday, who released her hold on him. "Nice place," Luke remarked, glancing around his mother-in-law's study. After spending these days with the Addams family, it no longer seemed strange to him that a room would have lethal traps capable of ending a person's life. On the center wall, there was a large desk with a grand chair behind it, and an oversized window covered by blood-red curtains. Rows of shelves filled with books, jars, and other items lined the side walls. "Doesn't your mom turn off the candles when she leaves?" Luke asked curiously, following Wednesday. The chandelier lighting the room had all its candles lit. "It's inefficient. This isn't a place for sleeping. It's better for the candles to stay lit. It'd be annoying to turn them on and off every day," Wednesday replied as she began searching the shelves for the book. "Magic candles, classic," thought Luke, joining in the search. After a few minutes, they found the Book of Shadows written by Goody Addams. The book had a dark, aged leather cover with an embossed pentagram. The spine was reinforced with strips of ancient metal, and it was clear at a glance that it easily exceeded 1,000 pages. "Finally, I have you in my hands," Wednesday murmured, touching the spine of the book. She could finally read the famous book her ancestor had written, with whom she had even had visions and spoken in cryptic ways. "Shall we take it?" Luke asked, eyeing Goody Addams' book with a hint of curiosity. Witchcraft could grant you very useful powers and boost your strength. Like Natasha, who managed to transform her body into metals or weapons, something a natural shapeshifter couldn't achieve. Besides, Goody's book had already been tested by her, a powerful psychic of her time, so the chances of the rituals going wrong were very low. There was no need to conduct trial-and-error research, constantly putting oneself in danger. All the groundwork had already been done. "No, unfortunately, my mother doesn't want me to read this book. We'll only read the resurrection ritual to understand exactly how it's done and then put it back, Wednesday replied with a frown. Her mother always let her play with dangerous things. Knives, enormous axes, sharp swords, poisonous insects, and much more. But she was very strict about Goody Adams' book of witchcraft. What would she say if she found out you want to steal one of the 6 demonic books? Luke asked with a slight smile. I'd like to see her expression, Wednesday said, opening the book and starting to search for the resurrection ritual. The book had no index, so it took them quite a while to find the necromancy ritual that explained in detail how to revive the dead. Luke flipped through the book quickly, while Wednesday calmly turned the pages. Every time his eyes landed on a paragraph, he found something more disturbing than the last. One section detailed terrifying potions, with grotesque illustrations that made him frown. One of the most chilling described a potion that caused a giant spider to grow on your head, replacing your hair. The spider's legs tangled with your scalp and were even visible to you. The most disturbing part was that the spider was alive and would become a part of you forever. If anyone tried to kill it, you'd feel unbearable pain, so the only option was to live with it. Another section detailed slow-acting poisons, designed not just to kill, but to prolong suffering to the maximum. Victims would die in screams of agony, their pain stretched over days or even weeks. Goody Adams was definitely out of her mind, Luke thought with a grimace of disgust as his eyes continued scanning the grotesque formulas and rituals. Some of these ideas were so macabre that even he, used to the cruel world of outcasts, felt slightly unsettled. Crackstone hadn't been wrong in calling her an evil witch. He could understand why Morticia didn't want Wednesday reading that book. Although both mother and daughter enjoyed the macabre and the dark, they weren't that extreme in their methods. Morticia, though strange and eccentric, had a clear ethical code. Many of the formulas in that book weren't just twisted. They were specifically designed to cause unnecessary and cruel harm, with no purpose beyond pain and destruction. Morticia enjoyed mystery, darkness, and the supernatural, but not senseless cruelty. She didn't want her daughter to follow that path. Wednesday wasn't fazed by the rituals, potions, and other grotesque formulas in the book. In fact, her eyes seemed more interested in some sections than others. I can see why your mother doesn't want you to have this book, Luke remarked. Even he found it overly gruesome, and he'd turned a couple of people into lumps of flesh. Wednesday glanced at him from the corner of her eye without pausing her exploration of the book. Maybe you don't understand the beauty of limits, she replied in a neutral tone. Who says limits are good? She added, still in a neutral tone. Limits are just chains that bind us to the mundane. There's an art to exploring the forbidden. Luke decided not to say anything. Finally, they found the ritual they were looking for. Read it too. My memory is good, but I don't want to take any chances. Even the slightest mistake and the ritual could backfire on us, Wednesday said, knowing that Luke had an eidetic memory. In a short time, Luke read through the necromancy ritual, which covered a few pages. Unlike the undead ritual the Spellmans had used, this one was much better. The revived person retained consciousness and intelligence, and their body parts didn't fall apart like the zombies that had attacked Nevermore. Luke wondered how Goody would react if she knew Crackstone would be resurrected using her ritual. Most likely, she'd created this ritual before her battle with the demonic Normie, as part of her personal research. Thinking about this, he realized something. The blood moon, the lunar eclipse. We forgot something, Luke murmured, and Wednesday looked at him with a raised eyebrow, not understanding his comment. The lunar eclipse, Luke said, meeting Wednesday's gaze. She immediately understood what he meant. Marilyn wanted to revive Crackstone during a lunar eclipse for a reason. That reason must be because Crackstone could only be resurrected during a lunar eclipse. Otherwise, she could have chosen another night. The Spellmans wouldn't have been forced to attack Nevermore on the night of the eclipse, when everyone was expecting it. Typically, each year has at least 2 lunar eclipses and 2 solar eclipses, though there can be up to 3 lunar eclipses and 4 solar, depending on the year. There should be at least 1 more lunar eclipse this year. When? I don't know. Wednesday broke the silence, looking resigned. She couldn't believe she'd forgotten something so important. Relax, I have the answer, Luke said, pulling out his phone. After a few minutes of searching, a slight smile appeared on his face. What? Tell me, Wednesday said impatiently. August 15th will be the second eclipse. There's also going to be a third at the end of the year, Luke replied. That's good, almost 2 months. Enough time to collect the dismembered parts, Wednesday said, more at ease. If the eclipse had been in September or later, her plans would have fallen apart. See, having a phone is useful, Miss Anti-Technology, Luke said with a mocking smile. Wednesday rolled her eyes slightly but didn't argue this time. After that, they put the book back in its place and left the study the same way they had entered. The mission was a success. "Want to watch a movie? We can go to your room or mine," Luke suggested as he walked down a hallway, shoulder to shoulder with Wednesday. "I can't. I have to practice my cello. Then I'll be going to bed," Wednesday replied after a few seconds, during which she seemed to hesitate, though Luke didn't notice in the dimly lit hallways. Mission failed again, Luke thought, sighing inwardly. They usually watched movies together, most of them horror, bloody, or dealing with controversial themes, but now Luke's intentions were different from watching the movie. Luke wanted to take things to the next level, but he didn't want to come across as desperate. He also knew Wednesday was someone who struggled with physical contact. Something that intimate would be hard to achieve quickly, so he didn't want to overwhelm her. He could wait and be patient, but he needed to test the waters now and then, as it was hard to tell from her blank, emotionless expression if she was ready to take the next step. Wednesday reached the door to her room and said goodnight to Luke with a simple nod. She won't even give me a goodnight kiss, and here I am wanting that with her, Luke thought, shaking his head as he stood in front of Wednesday's closed door. He continued on to his own room. Once there, he changed into his sleep clothes and collapsed onto his bed. His eyes drifted to an old bedside table where a necklace rested, the necklace in which Edgar resided. Since they arrived at the Adams mansion, Edgar had stopped appearing and only communicated with Luke telepathically, so his interaction with the chatty ghost had decreased. After Luke learned about his parents, he began to talk less with Edgar, as the ghost had known the truth and never told him. He couldn't deny that he was somewhat upset about it. He was just a chess piece in the war between the Spellmans and the Poes. In fact, he was the last piece of the Poes, the last member of the family bearing the name. The fallen family, should I try to rebuild it? Luke thought, staring at the ceiling, his head resting on the pillow. Revenge was something he once relished, especially when he thought his parents had sacrificed themselves to save him. Thinking about that had fueled his desire to crush the Spellmans, but now that fuel was gone. It was true that the Spellmans had blood on their hands. Many members of the Poe family had died because of them. But Luke hadn't known those relatives, so it was hard to use that as fuel. He hadn't known his parents either, but he believed they had sacrificed themselves for him, and they were his parents. Anyway, I have to fight, Luke thought, pushing those ideas aside. The Spellmans wouldn't stop trying to kill him, even if he didn't want to continue the feud. Besides, he already felt hatred toward them. They had attempted to kill him multiple times. They couldn't coexist. His thoughts drifted to the resurrection ritual created by Goody Adams. Specifically, it required 2 legs, 2 arms, a torso, a heart, and a brain. Each part had to come from different people, and they all had to have been alive before being mutilated. After the mutilation, the person had to die. The ritual wouldn't work otherwise if they were kept alive. The ritual had to be performed during a lunar eclipse, when the moon appeared a reddish color. According to the book, this was when the energies of the occult reached their peak. Then there was the usual setup, drawing a circle with engraved runes on the ground, and in the center of the circle, drawing a star with specific symbols on each point of the star. Looks like I'm going to turn into some damn member of a devil-worshipping cult, Luke thought with a slight grimace. Luckily, Wednesday would be handling that part of the ritual. They had nearly 2 months to gather all the mutilated parts. As for the trip to Ohio, He and Natasha had decided to go there once the holidays were over, to prepare as much as possible. Natasha was taking care of gathering the necessary ingredients for the gender change potion Luke would use. The potion wasn't permanent and only lasted a few hours, according to Natasha. Luke would then spend time in a house or undercover in the two small towns. Natasha needed to make a sizable batch of these potions, and was handling that, along with creating false identities for the three of them and other preparations for the trip. She told Luke to focus on his training, saying she was used to these kinds of missions and preferred handling all the tedious prep work on her own. Thinking about these things, Luke's eyes closed, and within minutes he slipped into a deep, restful sleep. Brownsville 0045. In a dimly lit alley, a scene was unfolding that was all too common in this neighborhood at such a late hour. "That's not enough money, bitch," exclaimed a man with a criminal appearance, slapping a woman with long, disheveled hair and a desperate expression. The woman, frail and barely able to stand, fell to the ground from the force of the blow. With what little strength she had, she crawled and looked up at the man. "Please, it's all I have," she cried desperately, clinging to the man's legs. "Don't touch me," the man shouted angrily, punching her in the face, knocking her back and splitting her lip as he shook her off. "We're drug dealers, not a charity, bitch," he added with a look of disgust, dusting off his pants. "Haha, she's really desperate," laughed one of his companions, who had been watching the whole scene. "Tell her to blow you, maybe you'll change your mind," joked another of his companions, a tall man wearing a black tank top, his arms covered in tattoos. Meanwhile, the woman lay sobbing on the ground, her hands pressed to her mouth as blood trickled down. "Not a chance. Her teeth must be rotten," the man replied with a grimace. "Besides, it's no joke, idiots. We're not selling much lately. That means those other bastards are stealing our customers," he added with a scowl. "Tusk, tusk. No respect for the lady," came a voice from a dark corner, just a few meters away from where the scene was unfolding. The three men turned their heads in alarm toward the unknown voice, watching as a figure walked toward them. Their expressions shifted to confusion as they took in the stranger's appearance. He wore a hooded leather jacket that obscured most of his face, leaving only his mouth and part of his nose visible. On his back was a bow and a quiver full of arrows. "Not a cop or any dangerous bastard," thought the man who had hit the woman, feeling a bit more at ease since it didn't seem to be the police or a rival gang. "Who the hell are you?" asked the man in the tank top, taking a step forward and pulling a sharp knife from his pocket as he moved toward the stranger. "I am Justice," replied the hooded figure in a calm tone. The tall man in the tank top stopped in his tracks, unable to hold back a laugh. His two companions joined in, laughing. "What, do you think this is a Marvel movie or some crap like that?" the man in the tank top asked, trying to control his laughter. He was now close to the hooded figure, but no longer felt he was a real threat. "Must just be a kid who spends too much time on the internet," said the man who had hit the woman. "This is the real world, kid. Go home to your mother before you get hurt," he added, his tone turning more menacing. The man in the tank top, ready to throw out another taunt, didn't get a chance to open his mouth before a punch slammed into his face, breaking his nose. And that wasn't all. A flurry of blows rained down on him. A punch to the stomach, another to the chin, and yet another to the nose. Pain surged through every nerve, and before he even realized it, he was unconscious on the ground. "Weak," murmured the hooded figure, who was none other than Luke, working as a vigilante. He realized that the tall, muscular man had lost consciousness by the second hit. "What the hell?" thought the man who had hit the woman, alarmed. He couldn't believe that his partner, nearly 2 meters tall and over 100 kilograms, had been knocked out in seconds. The two remaining men exchanged glances, and recognizing the danger, they reached for their weapons. But before their fingers could even touch the triggers, a whistling sound cut through the air. 2 black arrows flew and pierced their wrists, forcing both to drop their revolvers, which hit the ground with a loud metallic clang. The criminals looked at their bleeding wrists, shock freezing the blood in their veins. Before they could even process the pain throbbing in their hands, a strange, strong black cord whipped out from the darkness, wrapping around the neck of the man who had struck the woman. He felt the cold pressure of the noose tightening, making it hard to breathe. Now, what the hell? He thought, bewildered by the suffocating sensation closing around his throat. From the shadows, a female figure emerged. It was Wednesday, dressed in black like Luke, though her outfit was more form-fitting. A hood obscured her pale face as she looked down at the criminals like they were worthless trash. With a quick, controlled yank, Wednesday pulled the man toward her. He tried to resist, but the force dragging him was brutal, almost inhuman. She drew him close until their faces were mere inches apart, allowing him to glimpse her pale face and dark, abyss-like eyes. "You like hurting others, don't you?" she whispered icily, her lips barely forming a sarcastic smile. "A killer," thought the man, feeling a fear he hadn't felt in a long time. He could recognize a killer's eyes when he was face to face with them. Since he is a little boy, he lives a life of crime, full of deaths, gang fights, and more. Meanwhile, Luke knocked out the other man, who didn't stand a chance. The woman, still on the ground with blood on her mouth, watched the whole situation with wide eyes. Since when did superheroes show up in her city? Was this some kind of movie? "Interrogate him. We need to know who leads their gang or whatever it is. We're going to take down these damn traffickers," Luke said as he walked over to Wednesday and the low-level criminal. Since they'd chosen not to use their auras to make the hunt more thrilling, Luke couldn't access the criminals' memories. They would have to use old-fashioned methods. "You think you'll make it out alive after this? I won't say anything," the man muttered, finding a fresh sense of bravery, convinced that a couple of wannabe heroes couldn't take down an entire gang. This was real life, not some movie. "You really think you're the first to tell me that?" Wednesday murmured, leaning closer, her eyes fixed on his. "They all start the same, full of bravery, but eventually they all tell me exactly what I need to know." The man swallowed hard, unnerved. There was something terrifying in her cold, monotone voice. Wednesday shoved a piece of cloth into his mouth to stifle his screams and began her work. Luke watched from the side with an academic air, as if Wednesday were giving him a private lesson in the art of torture. In just 15 minutes, the man had tears in his eyes, desperate to talk, though he couldn't with the cloth still in his mouth. In the first 5 minutes he would have talked, Luke thought, arms crossed as he watched everything. Wednesday removed the cloth from the man's mouth and began asking everything she wanted to know. Within 5 minutes, they had all the information they needed. She also questioned him about his crimes. His name was Jacob. "Ahem. He didn't kill anyone," Wednesday remarked with a hint of disappointment, wiping blood off her hands with a handkerchief. The blood, of course, wasn't hers. "So he was saved, but I'm sure the leader of his gang deserves death. From him, we'll take the first limb. Maybe it would be good to start with an arm," Luke said, deciding on which body part to mutilate first from the gang leader. "Mutilate a limb," thought the woman, shuddering as she witnessed the torture and overheard the conversation between the two hooded figures. The supposed heroes who had come to save her behaved in a much darker and more sadistic way than she had imagined. She'd thought they were eccentric heroes in a good way, but they were something far more sinister. Luke and Wednesday had decided they would only kill murderers, people who had killed an innocent in cold blood. Those would be their targets to gather the body parts needed for their ritual. Yes, although this gang only handles local drug distribution. They aren't the real cartels, but it'll be helpful if these cartels lose their distributors, Wednesday said, giving the man a quick blow and knocking him out. They discovered that several criminal gangs in New York were competing for the right to distribute drugs, supplied by two main cartels from Mexico. The gang these three men belonged to was one of the three main ones in New York, mostly involved in drug and weapons trafficking. "Let's head to that club where they meet. They should be there," Luke said, turning around. "Where's the other piece of trash?" Wednesday asked, noticing that one of the men Luke had knocked out was missing. I let him go. I figured you might go overboard and the normie might end up dead. This way, we have a way to trace them back to their den, Luke replied with a slight smile. Besides, it's better if he warns the others. He was so scared that he fled without even helping his companions, he added. I never kill my prey before knowing everything I need to, Wednesday said, her gaze landing on the woman, who shivered under the attention of the two hooded figures. Luke looked at the woman and sent a mental command for her to fall asleep. Then, he sat beside her and began reading her memories. It served as practice for improving his memory-reading abilities, especially with others' memories, including very old ones. After almost 15 minutes, he stood up and gestured to Wednesday that they could leave. I thought we weren't using our auras, Wednesday commented as they started walking toward the criminals' base club. We agreed not to use them on enemies. I used it to get some practice, plus I erased a few traumas. If all went well, she'll stop being addicted to fentanyl, Luke said. How generous of you to manipulate a stranger's memories without their consent, Wednesday replied, picking up her pace. Helping people is my duty as a vigilante, Luke commented with a faint smile, keeping pace. That same night, New York City witnessed a brutal shift in its criminal underworld. In just one night, one of the city's most feared and violent gangs was practically wiped out. In the days that followed, the other two main gangs met the same fate. All the drugs they had in stock for distribution were also destroyed, resulting in millions of dollars in lost merchandise. The gang leaders, who had committed murders and heinous crimes, didn't see the sunrise. They were found dead, with parts of their bodies missing. The members who hadn't committed murders but were still violent and corrupt suffered serious injuries. Luke and Wednesday made sure they wouldn't have the chance to commit crimes again, leaving many in wheelchairs, with broken limbs, or in vegetative states. Since more than 3 body parts were needed for the ritual, Luke and Wednesday had to interrogate other gang members, searching for killers of innocents who deserved death. It wasn't hard to find them. These gangs were filled with members steeped in crime. Several had committed murders, not just the leaders. In no time at all, they gathered all the parts needed for the ritual, with plenty of time left before the lunar eclipse. Somewhere in the vast city of New York, there was a modest shop. A hand-painted sign hung above the entrance, displaying the name of the place in neat letters. Visions of the unknown. Want to know your future? Come in here. Upon crossing the threshold, a soft jingle of bells welcomed the customer. The walls of the small shop were adorned with elegant, dark tapestries. On a nearby shelf, old-looking books were stacked side by side. There were also small statues of mythical figures and amulets from different cultures. In the center of the room was a round table draped in a deep red cloth. There was a chair on each side of the table, one for the client and one for the fortune teller. The only object on the table was a crystal ball. A session was underway. A middle-aged woman with curls and a few wrinkles was listening intently and with deep concentration to the person seated across from her. Opposite her sat a hooded figure, speaking in a calm and measured tone, hands hovering near the crystal ball as if reading the future. An important piece of news is approaching your life. Depending on how you respond, you will either forge an unbreakable bond or all trust will be lost, said the hooded figure, who was none other than Luke. He had set up a fortune-telling business. Money didn't matter to him. He needed to practice his mental reading, and the best way was to have people willingly sit in front of him, looking at him intently without moving. This way, he could enter their minds and begin navigating their memories. First, he would see memories from the past few hours or minutes. Then he would delve deeper, memories from days, weeks, even months ago. His plan was to improve his memory-reading abilities while the person whose memories he was reading remained conscious. Although it wasn't the same as reading memories in the middle of a battle, where it's harder to focus on navigating an enemy's mind, especially if they're resisting, it was effective practice. On the other hand, doing it on normies was much easier than with outcasts. With normies, he could read memories from months back while they remained conscious, staring at him without moving. As for outcasts in a fight, he wasn't certain, as he hadn't tried it yet, but Luke believed he would be able to read memories from weeks back. This was a significant improvement compared to when he read the mind of the Wolfman from the Kyria clan, where he could only access memories from a few hours prior with just eye contact. While reading memories during a battle might not seem as impressive as his void blade, which could cut through materials harder than steel, it was a skill not to be underestimated. In battle, knowing your enemy by reading their mind could be invaluable. Their personality, habits, techniques, any traumas or triggers to make them angry, all of this knowledge could be useful if known in advance. If someone wore a hood, he could discover their identity by reading their memories without needing to knock them unconscious. Uncovering their plans would make things much easier. "What news? What should I do? How should I react?" asked the middle-aged woman, leaning closer to the table and staring at Luke. She had never believed in fortune tellers or future readers, but her life was going in a bad direction. Going to a therapist hadn't helped much, and a friend had recommended this strange place. When she first sat down, she was very skeptical, looking distrustfully at the man sitting across from her, as if he were a fraud. But after a few minutes of conversation, she was left speechless. This man seemed to know a lot about her past, though not the distant past, things she hadn't told her friend or her therapist. A true fortune teller, she wanted to believe. He guessed her name as soon as she sat in the chair. Her name was Martha. "In time, you'll know. All in due course," Luke said, trying to sound mysterious. "Please tell me. I'll pay more," Martha said, pulling money from her small purse and firmly placing $200 on the table. Luke looked at the money on the table. After a few seconds, he slowly extended his hand and took the money. "The news will come from your daughter, Rachel," Luke said. Martha wasn't surprised that the fortune teller knew her daughter's name, as he had revealed it to her a few minutes earlier. "What will Rachel tell me?" Martha asked, a hint of fear in her voice. On one hand, she didn't want any grim news, like her daughter having a deadly illness or something similar. On the other hand, her relationship with her daughter was tense and gradually worsening compared to years ago. "Your daughter carries a new life within her," Luke said gravely, after a few moments of silence. Martha's eyes widened in surprise, and for an instant, her breath caught. Luke had captured that memory from a week ago, when Rachel and Martha had a seemingly trivial conversation. In the memory, Rachel had come in nervously, with an anxious expression. She held a positive pregnancy test in her hands, but Martha hadn't noticed it since she was cooking with her back to her. Rachel hadn't shown her the pregnancy test, changed the subject, and quickly left the room. Luke was navigating the memory from his own perspective, so he saw Rachel and the pregnancy test she held in her hand. This wasn't fortune-telling, though it would seem so once Martha confirmed it with her daughter. "Really? If it's true, why didn't she tell me anything?" Martha murmured, a bit confused and unsure about accepting this news as absolute truth. "Your daughter fears your reaction. She's afraid of disappointing you since she hasn't finished her college degree and now has to take responsibility for a baby," Luke commented, and Martha was once again surprised that the fortune teller knew her daughter was in college. "Sometimes my reaction might be misinterpreted. It's just concern," Martha replied. "The only advice I can give you is to help your daughter in her journey to becoming a mother and not to criticize her. Otherwise, your relationship with her will end, and you'll never see your grandchild," Luke said in a somber tone, adding a bit of drama to the situation. The session time was up, and Martha hurried out of the shop, respectfully bidding farewell to Luke as she left. Another workday complete, Luke thought, stretching and glancing at the time on an old clock hanging in a corner of the shop. It was 5 in the afternoon. Luke and Wednesday had a brief stint as vigilantes. In just 3 days, they gathered the pieces they needed for the resurrection ritual. In those 3 days, or rather, nights, they took down some of the filthiest criminal gangs in New York. For Luke, it was less thrilling than he had anticipated. It was too easy, even though they avoided using their auras during fights. They only used them to travel undetected by surveillance cameras. The news of the eradication of the 3 criminal gangs made headlines across the United States, going viral in no time. It wasn't strange, given they found a club full of seriously injured criminals, some dead, and others missing limbs, a rare sight. No one knew who was responsible for this. Photos of Luke and Wednesday in their vigilante outfits were almost non-existent, but a few circulated online, thanks to today's era where everyone has high-quality camera phones. However, nobody believed that 2 people could take down 3 heavily armed gangs alone. As a result, the few photos that did circulate went largely unnoticed. Being a vigilante sucks, Luke thought as he left his shop. He locked the door and began walking. Unlike the superheroes in comics, movies, or series, he didn't have that feeling of helping people without expecting anything in return. He only did it for 2 reasons: for the ritual and to see if fighting a crowd of normies would be exciting. Since the eclipse was on August 15, he and Wednesday had plenty of time before needing to travel covertly to Nevermore. So, he decided to open a fortune-telling business to train his blue aura. What could be better than having normies knocking on your door and sitting in front of you, ready for their brains to be read, plus earning money from it? At first, it was hard to get clients since few people trust these kinds of things and look at you with suspicion. But with some clients, he altered their memories so they'd spread the word that his place was the best experience they'd ever had and that he wasn't a fraud. Today's Wednesday's birthday. I should get her something, thought Luke as he began walking and browsing various stores. It was Wednesday's 16th birthday, a milestone that outcasts took very seriously. The age of 16 had symbolic power in outcast society. Luke thought it was nonsense, having turned 16 a few weeks earlier himself and feeling no different. A new aura wouldn't hurt, he thought as he looked at pricey women's clothing stores. Since the 16th birthday held so much importance, Morticia and Gomez were preparing a big party for Wednesday. All the Adams would come to the birthday, and the Frumps were also supposed to attend. The Frumps were Morticia's family, a powerful and prominent psychic family, counted among the Big Six. Knowing the importance of turning 16, Wednesday reluctantly accepted the idea of such a grand celebration, aware they would throw it regardless. Her only other option would be to run away, but she preferred to endure one night with her annoying relatives and then return to her routine. A lineage of 2 psychic families belonging to the Big Six, thought Luke. The Big Six weren't just distinguished by their age and history. Their genes were also far superior to those of other psychics. So having both lineages was no small matter. The Umbrio family isn't bad either, thought Luke, as he entered a store. After looking through several dresses presented by a helpful saleswoman, Luke decided on a long-sleeved, short dress in a dark tone with fine white vertical stripes, giving it an elegant look that still respected Wednesday's color scheme. I wonder what the other Adams and the Frumps are like, thought Luke as he drove back to the Adams mansion in an Audi. He was curious to meet the rest of the Adams family and Morticia's family. Naturally, the party would be held at night. Luke was driving the Audi at a moderate speed back to the Adams mansion. The car was the same one Natasha had used when she followed the Adamses from Nevermore. The car belonged to Luke. Natasha had bought it with the money he earned from his books. Only a few weeks ago, he had turned 16, which allowed him to get his driver's license. Although, due to his young age, he needed an adult in the passenger seat with a valid driver's license until he turned 16 and a half. But Luke didn't really care about that. If he were pulled over, he could use a bit of his mental power to make the police see his birth date as meeting the requirements when they looked at his license. 2. The party's at 9, Luke thought, glancing at the time as he turned onto the curve leading to the road toward the Adams mansion. The trees were tall, with thin trunks and sparse foliage. The road was gloomier compared to the previous streets. If you came here at night, you could only rely on your car's headlights, as there was no electricity from this point onward. 2. Luke was curious to meet more members of the Adams family. From what little he knew, there were 3 main branches. Gomez's father, may he rest in peace, had two other brothers. From those brothers, there were Gomez's cousins, who should also have children, continuing to spread the Adams lineage. Currently, Gomez was the head of the family, though from what Luke had learned, he wasn't part of the Council of 66. Most likely, Gomez found it bothersome and dull to attend those meetings. It was obvious that Fester wasn't interested in dealing with the family's political issues either. Most likely, one of Gomez's cousins, assuming they weren't as odd as Gomez and Fester, was handling the family's position in the council. On the other hand, there was Morticia's family, the Frumps. Luke knew little about them, only that they were part of the 6 great families. The families that make up the 6 greats are the Poes, the Adams, the Frumps, the Spellmans, the Faulkners. Nathaniel Faulkner was the founder of Nevermore. Wednesday once found his journal, which contained information about the Hydes. His psychic powers teacher, Charles, belongs to this family. And finally, the Von Drachens. Eleonora von Drachen was the founder of the Academy of Dark Arts. To Luke, the Adams were a family overflowing with eccentricities, with an unusual joy for the macabre and complete disregard for social norms, especially Gomez, Fester, and Eudora. In contrast, the Frumps, as Luke deduced from meeting Morticia recently, seemed dark, gothic, and sophisticated. Where the Adams are loud and bold in their appreciation for the morbid, the Frumps are elegant and enigmatic, displaying a deep connection to mystery. Wednesday and Pugsley would be a blend of both, as they carry the lineage of 2 great psychic families. Another strange fact is that it's rare for psychics from the 6 greats to marry each other, as Morticia and Gomez did. Generally, there's a significant rivalry among these 6, or rather 5 families. They don't want a talented family member to end up taking another family's name. For instance, as happened with Morticia, who left behind the Frump name instead of having her husband take the Frump name. Additionally, Wednesday and Pugsley are Adams, not Frumps, which is another loss for the family. All it did was strengthen the Adams line with even better psychics. Luke learned these things thanks to Natasha. He had spoken to Edgar very little since he stopped leaving the necklace. His anger toward the ghost for not telling him about his parents was now gone. Thanks to Edgar, he had managed to increase his strength and truly harness his auras. He wouldn't blame him for something his parents had decided, and not him. It only bothered him that Edgar hadn't told him, but he had already let go of that anger. Is he in some sort of hibernation? Luke thought as he drove along the bumpy, straight road. Lost in his thoughts, Luke then sensed something more concrete. A murderous intent, subtle yet unmistakable, directed right at him. The silence of the road was shattered by a sharp, deafening blast. Luke reacted in an instant, jerking the wheel, and immediately an impact shook the car. He felt the brutal vibration as the bullet hit the rear tire, blowing it out with a loud bang and sending the vehicle to the brink of losing control. On the verge of overturning, Luke used his telekinesis to stabilize the vehicle. An invisible force steadied the car, which was traveling at over 60 km/h. He precisely balanced it, absorbing each twist and jolt until the vehicle came to a sudden, safe stop, with the chassis still vibrating under the strain of his control. The surprised look on Luke's face was gone when he stepped out of the car. His gaze was icy, his domain fully extending in its full splendor. He managed to see the Adams mansion about 5 km away. At a distance of 2 km, he could spot 3 auras. 2 were unfamiliar, but one he knew very well. That damn kid won't give up, thought Luke, recognizing Pugsley's aura from 2 kilometers away. Even before expanding his domain, Luke knew the attack wouldn't be from the Spellmans. They'd be looking for his death if they attacked him so close to the Adams mansion, or even in New York, since that was Adams' territory. That's why Natasha had allowed him to run his business there, and she didn't worry about his safety. It was obvious this was that damn brat who couldn't stop trying to kill him. At first, Luke had taken it as some kind of joke or the strange games the Adams played, especially since when he complained to Wednesday or her parents, they just brushed it off. He'd been more patient, too, given that he'd kissed Wednesday right in front of Pugsley just to annoy him. knowing the kid was already in shock from finding out his sister had a boyfriend. But this had now crossed the line of what Luke was willing to put up with. The kid had attacked him with a damn sniper rifle. The other assassination attempts had been easy enough for Luke to avoid, but this time it had been close. If not for his observation hacky, he might have ended up seriously injured or with a bullet between his eyebrows. You won't escape, Luke thought, his mind filled with murderous intent. In an instant, he launched himself off the ground at blinding speed in Pugsley's direction. He didn't care about the two strangers. If they got involved, he'd turn them into mush. You missed, little pug, exclaimed a tall, skinny boy with binoculars in his eyes, watching as the bullet hit a tire, making it explode. What a shame, said another boy, identical to the first. Same height, same hair color, same eyes. Both wore amused smiles, as if what Pugsley had just done was the most normal thing in the world. Tish, Pugsley clicked his tongue, annoyed. He was lying on the ground, one eye peering through the sniper scope. Oh, we've got a problem, said the boy with the binoculars. He watched as Luke looked straight at them, despite being 2 kilometers away and hidden in the bushes. What's wrong? Is he going to hunt us down? Asked the other boy, sounding excited and grinning widely. Yes, he's coming straight here. Flying, the boy replied, removing his binoculars. Pugsley had already gotten up from the ground. He'd seen Luke take off towards them, and a new fear started to grow within him. Luke had never attacked him before. Surely this would be the same, right? His speed is insane. Run, shouted the tall boy, starting to sprint along with his twin brother. Pugsley didn't hesitate either. He didn't care about leaving the rifle behind. It wasn't even his. Cousin found herself a good partner, ha, shouted the boy, realizing that the rumors about Luke's multiple auras were true. They saw him using telekinesis and clairvoyance to locate them. Only the blue aura was missing. Though all 3 were pretty fast, the twins made sure to keep up with Pugsley, not wanting to leave him behind. But the speed of a preteen couldn't compete with Luke's flight, and he caught up to them in no time. The 3 turned around as they felt a presence land behind them, kicking up dust, dirt, and leaves. Seeing Luke's furious expression, they realized they'd messed up, but the twins kept their excited, amused smiles, thrilled by the imminent showdown. The 2 young men stepped forward, shielding Pugsley from Luke. Run, little pug. We'll handle him, or try to. Tell our parents we died with the highest honors. Don't get in my way, Luke snapped, his voice cold and without a trace of patience, barely sparing them a glance. He had no interest in knowing their identities. Both of his fists, cloaked in telekinetic waves, shot toward them at high speed, crashing into 2 stone shields the brothers created. The large, square shields of solid stone had been summoned from their own hands. However, stone was little match for Luke's telekinetic force. With a deafening crack, the shields shattered into fragments that flew in all directions, and the impact sent the twins hurtling through the air like ragdolls. Pugsley barely had time to react as a blur shot past his left, followed by another flashing past his right. The twins' bodies flew until they crashed into 2 trees. He couldn't help but take a step back, his heart pounding in his chest, paralyzed as he saw Luke's face for the first time, overflowing with murderous intent and fury. What's wrong, kid? Try to kill me now if you dare, Luke said, walking toward Pugsley and cracking his knuckles, considering what punishment would make the boy stop bothering him. As Luke advanced step by step, Pugsley backed away without taking his eyes off him, his legs shaking like jelly until he eventually stumbled. He could see in Luke's gaze a fierce killing intent, eyes that seemed to truly consider whether to kill him or not. Or at least that's what Pugsley thought, being used to the cold stare of his sister who often tortured him with her looks, though she always had a line she never crossed. Luke had no intention of killing Pugsley. Doing so would leave him in serious trouble, very serious trouble. He wasn't an idiot. He already had enough to deal with in facing the Spellmans, and if he added the Adams family to the mix, it would mean the end of the Poe family. Every Poe ancestor, including Edgar, would curse him for eternity. The only option would be to get Crackstone's demonic book and make a pact with a greater demon to try to wipe out both families. That damned kid had already tried to kill him several times. Didn't he have the right to kill him? He did, but it would turn all the Adamses against him. No matter that Wednesday was his girlfriend, even she would turn against him for killing her brother, ending their relationship with him. For this last reason alone, Luke would never kill Pugsley. He didn't want to lose Wednesday. Luke extended his palm toward Pugsley, who was lifted off the ground by an invisible force. Pugsley tried to break free, but was powerless against Luke's telekinetic immobilization, now reaching over 5 tons and nearing 6. He could now immobilize a gorgon like Atlas, though it wouldn't be of much use since he'd need to channel all his telekinetic strength to do it, leaving him unable to deliver a strong enough attack to inflict significant harm. Pugsley slammed violently against a tree, feeling pain shoot through his back as he was left floating, immobilized against the tree trunk. Should I leave you in a wheelchair, or maybe a mental attack would be more effective? Luke wondered aloud. If he broke Pugsley's legs, it would be a big trauma, but as an Adams who's endured Wednesday's tortures, he'd probably get over it. With the resources the Adamses have, he might even walk again the same day after taking a potion. Besides, Gomez and Morticia likely wouldn't make much of it, or at least that's what Luke hoped. Pugsley's face turned even paler upon hearing Luke. Although his sister tortured him fairly often, she never went to such extremes. Luke was overestimating the kind of torture Wednesday put Pugsley through, since he'd never actually witnessed it. I suppose I'll go with physical pain, Luke decided after a few moments of contemplation. An extreme mental attack could be very harmful to Pugsley, who had never suffered such damage to his brain. Breaking his legs seemed better. Physical pain he was more used to, or so Luke thought. Pugsley's hopes vanished when he saw Luke extend 2 fingers and slowly begin to close them. He felt a force start to press on his left leg. He never thought his sister's boyfriend was this crazy. Although he's not the best one to talk about madmen, considering that he had tried to kill him several times. But he figured with Luke's strength and his 3 auras, he should survive. Based on all the rumors he'd heard, Luke was supposed to be strong. With his sister, he always played this way, but she never went to such extremes as to break his legs. And Luke seemed intent on doing it slowly, one leg first, then the other, to prolong the pain. Just then, Wednesday emerged from a shadow. "Wait, Luke," she said in her usual expressionless tone. She had heard the gunshot and knew her brother was trying something stupid. Fortunately, she arrived in time. Otherwise, her brother would have experienced a pain he'd never felt, a trauma that, even as an Adams, would be hard to overcome. Luke's gaze shifted to Wednesday, less cold than before. Pugsley stopped feeling the force that was about to snap his leg, and he exhaled in relief, though he was still immobilized. "Give me a reason to stop. He tried to kill me with a damn sniper rifle," Luke said with a hint of impatience. "Must have been the fault of those 2 idiots," thought Wednesday, glancing briefly at the unconscious bodies of her 2 older cousins. In his attempts to kill, Pugsley never went that far. There was a line he didn't cross, if such a line even existed for attempted murders. Wednesday knew she couldn't explain to Luke that these 2 idiots had goaded Pugsley into doing something so reckless. She knew Luke wouldn't care for that excuse. If she were Luke, she'd do the same, though she wasn't sure she'd go so far as to break her boyfriend's younger brother's legs if he had one in some other reality. Most likely, she would have gone that far. "Do it for me," Wednesday replied, and Luke was surprised by her response. "What if I don't?" Luke asked, his eyes locked on Wednesday's, which were just as unwavering. "There's nothing else I could do. My foolish brother would have to face the consequences of his actions," Wednesday said, with no intention of fighting Luke. She just wanted to stop him so her brother wouldn't suffer, but she felt she had no right to do so by force when it was obvious that Pugsley was at fault. "Sister," Pugsley thought, nearly in tears. He had expected her to summon her scythe and fight Luke to free him. She had always defended him against bullies in the past. After a few tense seconds, Pugsley felt the invisible force disappear, and he fell to the ground. He felt a bit of pain from the landing, but he didn't care. He wanted to thank whoever he could that he wasn't left in a wheelchair. Tish, Luke clicked his tongue as he turned around. He took off and disappeared from sight, heading toward his car. He still needed to change that damn tire. Wednesday walked over to her brother, who was still trembling. It seemed today's lesson would finally stop him from trying to kill Luke. "You're an idiot. Know your target before you decide to play like that. He didn't grow up with us. He doesn't have the patience to put up with your stupid murder attempts," Wednesday said coldly, then turned and quickly followed after Luke. As for her two cousins, they had it coming. Their injuries weren't anything serious by Adam's standards, just a few broken bones and some blood. It was like when Luke sparred with Gomez, even he got worse injuries in that match. Using his telekinesis, Luke began changing the tire. Fortunately, the bullet had only hit the rubber, sparing the metal rim, so there weren't any major issues. As he worked, Wednesday emerged from the forest and walked toward him, looking as pristine as ever. She noticed that Luke was angry, which seemed only natural. "Thank you," Wednesday said curtly, though her tone was sincere. "Why don't you want your brother to suffer the consequences of his actions? You torture him regularly. Don't coddle him too much." "Or he'll end up hitting a wall one day," Luke said, giving the tire a light kick to make sure it was secured. Wednesday looked at Luke with a strange expression, one she rarely wore. "What exactly were you planning to do to him?" she asked, without addressing Luke's question. "Something simple. Break his legs," Luke replied without hesitation, picking up the sniper bullet that had landed on the ground. "Compared to what he tried to do to me, I think it's pretty merciful. It's true that this time he crossed the line, but that's because of my two cousins. They're very unruly and always stirring up trouble," Wednesday began. "By the way, how do you imagine my tortures of Pugsley?" she asked. "Like the ones we do to the gang members," Luke replied, raising an eyebrow, a bit confused by the question. "Two. Those are extreme tortures where we push them to the brink of mental collapse from both physical and mental pain. I'd never do something that intense to my younger brother," Wednesday clarified, realizing that Luke had misunderstood a few things. Luke blinked, his mind trying to process what he'd just heard. "What?" he thought, completely taken aback. So Wednesday actually had levels of torture depending on the victim. He'd never thought the Adams would be the type to classify pain. Though it made sense, especially if it involved a family member. They wouldn't go so far as to leave them on the verge of death. Cold sweat appeared on Luke's forehead. He almost screwed up. If Pugsley had actually shown up at the Adams mansion with his legs twisted at different angles, crushed, and with bones visible, he might have been seriously screwed. "It's not my fault," Luke internally complained, recalling all the strange things he had seen and heard in the mansion. After all, Pugsley had tried to kill him with a sniper rifle. How did breaking his legs even compare? "Damn, this family is starting to mess with my perception of reality," he thought, casting a quick glance at Wednesday. Luckily, she arrived in time. Even though he wished, she'd put more emphasis on protecting her brother, since he had been seconds away from breaking Pugsley's legs. "Thanks," Luke exclaimed, placing his hands on Wednesday's delicate shoulders, to which she gave him another strange look. "I don't understand why you're thanking me. He deserved what you were about to do to him," Wednesday remarked. She had only intervened because he was her younger brother, but if Luke had refused, she would have let him break Pugsley's legs, as he had every right after Pugsley's serious attempt to kill him with a sniper rifle. In fact, if Luke hadn't done anything to Pugsley, she would have given her brother a lesson herself, since his attempt this time had far exceeded previous ones and had been dangerously reckless. This time, it was Luke who gave her a strange look. "I don't understand your limits on torture, Wednesday. On one hand, you tell me what I was about to do was extreme, and then you say he deserves it," Luke admitted, shaking his head. Wednesday raised an eyebrow, the corner of her mouth barely curving. "It depends on the context. Torturing for the fun of the moment is one thing, and torturing someone who truly deserves it is another. My brother shot at you with a sniper rifle. He deserved to suffer for that. So, if you'd refused my request, I wouldn't have gotten further involved. He would have experienced pain he'd never felt before, but he would have deserved it. With my grandmother's healing potions, he'd be able to walk again, so there's no problem. Luke understood Wednesday's point. He wasn't sure if the other Adams would feel the same way. Probably not. Only Wednesday had such a cold and rational mindset. It was a good thing he hadn't actually broken Pugsley's legs. "I'll drive you home. Can't have the birthday girl getting dirty," Luke said, opening the passenger door for her. Wednesday got into the car. She didn't want to run or walk the 5 kilometers, and she wanted to keep Luke company. Luke started the engine and pressed the accelerator, heading toward the Adams mansion. "What's this?" Wednesday asked, noticing a sophisticated purple bag beside her seat. Luke, who was driving while keeping his eyes on the road, glanced over and noticed the object Wednesday was referring to. "Your gift. Did you really think I wouldn't get you anything for your birthday?" Luke replied, not hiding that he'd bought her something. "I assumed you'd give me a present for my birthday," Wednesday said, in her usual monotone. After all, she had given Luke 3 Gothic literature books for his birthday. Luke had also received gifts from the Adams family, Natasha, and his 2 friends, Xavier and Ajax. That birthday turned out to be the best of his life, in both his lives. "What I didn't expect was that you'd give me clothes," Wednesday said with some disappointment as she felt the bag's soft texture. It could only be clothing. She had hoped for a book, weapons, poisons, or something along those lines. Though she liked the necklace Luke gave her and held them in high regard, she preferred practical items over clothing or accessories. "Hey, don't inspect it. That's cheating," Luke exclaimed, pulling the bag out of Wednesday's hands. It was supposed to be a surprise, but now she already knew it was clothing. "One glance was enough to tell me it's clothes. The logo on the bag is pretty obvious," Wednesday said. "Tish, you're the only girl who isn't happy about getting clothes as a gift. It's designer and very expensive, though your family isn't exactly short on money," Luke said, shrugging. "Having a lot of clothes is a waste of time. I don't understand how girls my age find shopping for clothes entertaining," Wednesday said with a slight grimace. Her closet had few different items, with the same piece repeated multiple times. If she wanted, she could fill an entire room with clothes using her family's wealth, but it would be the last thing she'd ever do. "I'm sure this outfit suits your taste," Luke said, knowing that Wednesday's entire wardrobe was mainly black, with white as a secondary color. Morticia had once mentioned that Wednesday was allergic to color, which is why her uniform at Nevermore was black instead of indigo. "Although," he murmured, remembering the dress's length, that was the only difference from Wednesday's usual clothes. "What?" Wednesday asked, having caught Luke's murmur. "Oh, nothing important, by the way. Are those 2 twins your cousins? Adams or Frump?" Luke asked, quickly changing the subject. "Adams, second cousins, Nick and Simon, seniors at a normie school in New York. Both have orange auras specializing in earth manipulation," Wednesday answered, as if giving a report on a target they were meant to eliminate. "Their stone shields aren't bad," Luke remarked, recalling the 2 shields the twins had conjured quickly and effectively. Too bad their hardness wasn't enough to withstand Luke's telekinetic force. If he'd hit them without it, he would have broken his hands. He could tell those shields would withstand multiple gunshots. "They could improve, but they spend the whole year lazing around," Wednesday said with mild disapproval, though she still held her second cousins in high regard. "Why don't they go to Nevermore?" Luke asked, refocusing on the road. Even on a straight path, it was better to avoid potholes if possible. "They don't like studying, especially not at a boarding school. They keep saying they're free spirits or some nonsense like that. Plus, they constantly pull pranks at the normie schools they attend. They probably have more expulsions than the 2 of us combined," Wednesday replied. In a few minutes, they arrived at the Adams mansion. Morticia and Gomez, with the help of Thing and Lurch, were setting up all the decorations for the birthday party that night. Wednesday looked at it all with a grimace, then went up the grand staircase with Luke toward her room. "Darling, bring Luke down later to introduce him to your uncles. They'll be delighted to meet him," Morticia said, glancing up at the stairs. "They just left to look for Nick and Simon after hearing that gunshot. Do you know what caused it?" Morticia added, clearly suspecting that they were involved in the deafening shot from a few minutes before. Luke paused midway up the stairs, glancing at Morticia with Wednesday. He tried to keep a poker face. He was certain Wednesday's uncles wouldn't be thrilled to meet him after finding their sons unconscious in the woods with broken bones. "I'll introduce him to the whole family later. I won't waste my time on multiple introductions," Wednesday said, continuing up the stairs without answering the question. Luke followed her in silence, just hoping Pugsley wouldn't go crying to Morticia. The last thing he wanted was to get on her bad side. As for Gomez, he was sure he wouldn't mind. He'd likely see the incident as child's play. "You don't seem very happy about your birthday," Luke commented as he entered Wednesday's room and closed the door behind him. "I'm not a fan of birthdays," Wednesday replied, sitting on the edge of her bed and staring at Luke. She didn't like being the center of attention or having so many people crowding around for her attention. She knew that no matter how much she didn't want to celebrate, her relatives would show up, so she'd given up on not celebrating her birthday a long time ago. The only thing that would solve it would be running away. Luke nodded, not offering any further comments. As for him, he didn't like being the center of attention either, but he couldn't deny he felt a bit jealous seeing Wednesday's parents decorating the whole house with smiles to celebrate her birthday. "Here, happy 16th birthday, Cara Mia," Luke said with a teasing smile, holding out the bag. "I told you not to call me that," Wednesday replied with a cold expression as she snatched the bag from his hand. "I'm just kidding, and I do it when we're alone," Luke said, amused, as he sat beside Wednesday, who was already opening the bag and pulling out the delicate dress. "Truth often hides behind silly jokes, until it stops being funny," Wednesday said as she carefully examined the dress. Luke's mocking expression changed at Wednesday's comment, and he fell silent, thinking seriously. As Luke stood silently contemplating the sentence she said, Wednesday was able to observe the dress in peace. She liked the design. The dress was dark-toned with fine white vertical lines, giving it a great sense of elegance, which was to her taste. The collar was wide and pointed, evoking a retro style, and the sleeves were long. Everything was perfect until she noticed the length of the dress. "It's very short," Wednesday commented with a slight frown. She really liked the elegant, classic style of the dress. Too bad it was too short for her taste. Her thighs would be visible, and she wasn't a fan of that. If she had to fight, it would be very uncomfortable. "I didn't notice when I bought it. If you want, we can go exchange it, although there aren't any longer ones," Luke said, pretending to be clueless. Wednesday stared at him and knew he was lying. It was obvious to her what his intentions were, but she didn't say anything. She got up from the edge of the bed, the dress in hand, and walked to a door that led to a personal changing room in her room. She entered, closed the door, and a few minutes later came out with the new dress on. Luke looked at Wednesday, surprised. He thought she wouldn't wear the dress since she wasn't a fan of changes, but here she was, standing in front of him. The dress was fitted to her body, accentuating her figure and cinched at the waist. Her pale legs stood out more than usual, as they were never visible. Luke couldn't help but stare at them. "My face is up here," Wednesday said, walking toward Luke, and with a hand she lifted his gaze to meet her eyes. I know," Luke said, trying to sound calm, though it didn't quite work, causing Wednesday to smile slightly. "You like my legs, huh?" Wednesday said in a mocking, sharp tone. What? No, that's not it," Luke immediately denied, but his tone was far from convincing. It wasn't his fault. Despite Wednesday's delicate figure, her body was trained to the limit. She was muscular, not a skinny, bony girl. Luke couldn't understand why she made him so nervous about these things. It had never happened with any other girls he met in the past. There hadn't been many, but he wasn't inexperienced. Yet in front of her, he felt like one. "You can look if you want. It doesn't bother me," Wednesday said, sitting next to Luke again on the edge of the bed. "One. "Oh, thanks, though I'm your boyfriend. I should have that right," Luke said, turning his gaze toward that part of her body. Wednesday rolled her eyes, unable to believe how shameless he was. After a few seconds, Luke returned his gaze to Wednesday, who was also staring at him, wondering when he would stop looking at her legs. "Are you really going to wear it?" Luke asked. "Yes, it's not bad to change things up once in a while," Wednesday replied. "I'm glad to hear that. It'd be a waste to return the dress when it's the only length available," Luke nodded, secretly pleased. "Try to make your intentions less obvious next time," Wednesday said with a slight smile, crossing her legs. The movement drew Luke's gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about," Luke said, crossing his arms and slightly closing his eyes to hide it a little more. 10 minutes before 9 in the evening, Gomez called Luke to his office. It seemed like he had something to tell him, so he followed him to his large office while Wednesday waited for the guests, not too happy. Gomez's office was at the end of a long, very dark hallway. The door was larger than usual and a deep reddish color. Luke entered for the first time and observed the room with curiosity. The room was bigger compared to Morticia's, which he and Wednesday had visited during their mission to read Goody Adams' Book of Shadows. Unlike his wife, Gomez was much more disorganized. His desk was covered in papers scattered everywhere, and books were piled up even in the corners since the shelves were crammed. "One of these books must be some kind of mechanism that leads to a secret room," thought Luke. If it was like the movie, the secret room would open if you picked the right book. Supposedly, in that room, Gomez kept a vault full of money, gold, and other valuables. Luke wasn't planning on stealing or anything like that. It just reminded him of the movie he'd seen in his past life. Money wasn't something he lacked, and he wasn't so heartless as to think about robbing his father-in-law. "What happened?" Luke asked, curious. It had to be something important if Gomez had called him just minutes before the start of his beloved daughter's birthday party. "I just wanted to show you something. It'll be quick," Gomez replied as he walked toward one of the office walls. Luke looked at the wall for the first time. Unlike the others, it had no shelves, statues, or decorations. The only thing on the wall was a dark fabric hanging discreetly, covering something of considerable size. It was made of a heavy, slightly worn material, with silver-gray details, and hung from a rod at the top. Luke walked over with Gomez, stopping and looking at the fabric on the wall, wondering what it might be hiding. It could be a painting, though he doubted Gomez wanted to discuss art with him. Without wasting time, Gomez gave a quick tug on a side cord, and the fabric lifted and rolled smoothly upward. Before Luke's eyes appeared many faces, both men and women, some adults, others teenagers, and some children. Below each face was the person's name. "A family tree," thought Luke, quickly realizing what he was looking at. It was the Adams family tree. Each family member was represented in detailed portraits, with their names carefully written in Gothic calligraphy below their faces. The arrangement formed a structure that descended from the oldest ancestors to the most recent members. Luke examined the tree, his eyes moving up, down, then right, then left. There were hundreds of members in the family, and at the very bottom he could see Wednesday, Pugsley, and Wednesday's second cousins whom he had met today. Almost at the top was Goody Adams. Although she wasn't the oldest of the Adams, she was close to it. Luke estimated that the Adams ancestors must date back to the 14th or 15th century. Just as Luke was about to ask why Gomez was showing him the Adams family tree, he held back as Gomez spoke first. "Our founding ancestor had 3 sons. One of them was Abraham Adams. I come from that branch," Gomez said, looking upward, nearly at the very top. Luke followed his gaze to see a bearded man with yellowed teeth and a crooked smile. "My cousin Octavius is a descendant of Alaric Adams, Abraham's younger brother. Lastly, there's Donovan, the youngest of the 3 brothers. My cousin It is a descendant of him," Gomez continued, as Luke listened attentively and looked at the family tree, wondering if the Poe mansion in Boston had something similar. Alaric Adams had a slight, confident smile with impeccably groomed hair and beard. He also appeared to be wearing a clean suit, though it was only partially visible. Donovan, on the other hand, looked very peculiar as he was completely covered in hair. Only 2 small sockets were visible as his eyes. These were the 3 main branches of the Adams family. Luke now understood more precisely how the Adams family was structured, a family of psychics. No book offered clear information on these topics, and Edgar had always been ambiguous, speaking in riddles. From what he knew, Octavius, Gomez's cousin, was the father of the twins Luke had struck. He hadn't yet met him in person. As for it, he remembered him from the show. It was hard to forget a human covered in hair. By the end of the brief explanation, which lasted a few minutes, Luke had gained a rough idea of how many members currently made up the Adams family. This information was crucial since the Spellmans likely had a similar number of members, perhaps a bit more or a bit less. They have over 50 members, not counting Edward and others who are still alive due to their pact with the greater demon, thought Luke, furrowing his brows slightly as he realized the numbers he was up against. And this was without including the servants under the Spellman's command, such as Atlas, Amaranth, and Deacon. If each main branch of the family had approximately 20 members, this would imply a total of nearly 60 members for the Adams, who had 3 main branches. In Gomez's branch, the family consisted of Wednesday, Gomez, Morticia, Pugsley, Fester, and Eudora. However, these weren't all the members. Psychics often had longer lives than normies, making it common for great-grandparents to still be alive. With this in mind, and considering that psychics generally have 1 or 2 children, in a family tree spanning around 3 generations, there could be almost 20 people in each family branch. With the members still alive due to demonic deals, plus the servants under their command, the Spellmans could have around 100 members in their ranks. Compared to the Poes, who consisted only of him and Natasha, it was a daunting situation. Maybe it's fewer since they were in a war, thought Luke, trying to be more optimistic. After all, in the war against the Poes, they also suffered losses, the most recent being Sabrina and Sebastian Spellman. Thanks for showing me this, Luke said sincerely. Now he had a rough idea of the Spellman's strength. More than 50 psychics, that was no small matter. In the fight between Edgar and Edward and Elton, they destroyed a city, and it wasn't even their goal. Those were collateral damages, though they were the strongest psychics of their respective families. It's nothing, Gomez replied with a slight smile, as the curtain covered the family tree once again. After that, they headed to the hall where the celebration and banquet in honor of Wednesday would take place. The hallways leading to the room were illuminated and decorated for the occasion, creating an easy path for anyone to follow. As Luke walked with his father-in-law, he checked the time on his wristwatch. It was 9:05 p.m. The party should have already begun. I wonder if he would help me in the war, thought Luke. The person whose help he wanted was Gomez. Their relationship had improved greatly over time. Aside from Wednesday, he spent the most time with Gomez, either training or talking about a variety of topics. He also learned from Wednesday that Gomez belongs to the Demon Extermination Department, and it's highly likely that he holds a high position or is even the leader. So if Luke tells him that the Spellmans make deals with demons, it could be very advantageous for the Poes, as long as Gomez believes him, since Luke has no concrete evidence. The only proof, if it can be called that, is that Atlas and the others tried to revive Crackstone, a demonic normie. Though everyone thinks it was to kill Luke, it did tarnish the Spellman's reputation. If Wednesday believed him, why wouldn't Gomez? However, Luke pushed those thoughts aside. It would be best to gather solid evidence and expose the Spellmans so everyone targets them, rather than relying on trust alone. Wednesday only believed him because she trusts him, but not everyone will be the same. Even the Umbrio family, after reading Sophie's post-mortem letter, were skeptical about the Spellmans making demon deals, and they've yet to take any action despite having read the letter. Wednesday did say that her family loves war, and Luke doesn't doubt that the Adamses are willing to defend him. They invited him to their home, knowing the Spellmans might attack or turn against them for protecting him. But it's different to accept, without any evidence, that the Spellmans make pacts with demons, a taboo subject, even for psychics who love dark witchcraft like Goody Adams and likely the Frumps. Gomez opened a pair of dark double doors and entered the room. Luke followed him, and the view that greeted him took him by surprise. Thanks for watching this episode. Like, share, and follow for more interesting stories and narrations. Thanks a lot.